Hello, in this video we're going to have a look at how to securely store user credentials on the Postgres database. So all we're doing here is looking at how we can encode the user passwords and other information such as username or email and store that. As usual, the code will be available on the GitHub repository, and if you wish to follow along line by line, you'll be able to find this blog post which will include all of the code that you'll need to implement in your project as well. The links for these will be available in the descriptions, so I'll go ahead and start explaining what's happening. So the first thing that you'll need to do is add this implementation for the Spring Framework security library. Once this is compiled, you'll have access to a couple of libraries that we'll need to use. So we'll need to create this password encoder service class, which implements the password encoder. As you can see here, this is from the Spring Framework security library, and all we need to do is create two functions, one for encode and the other for matches. These do exactly as what they describe. So the encode function, you give it a character sequence and it encodes it. It returns you a value, and this is a safe value that we want to store in our database. So for instance, you give it a raw password, we encode this raw password, and we have a sequence of characters that we then store in the database. To a standard user, these sequence of characters is not going to mean a lot, but you'll be able to use the matches function in order to compare a raw password against this encoded value. So this is all handled for you by these Spring Framework crypto libraries, so you don't have to worry about it. All you have to do is really implement them inside your service. So for JWT, for instance, we're using this authentication provider. And I didn't have to change anything here because I've delegated the requirements to compare them to the service or the repository model. So for instance, here we have the account repository and we check that the credentials are valid. If we go in here, we can see that we're using this bcrypt password encoder service, and we check the password against the user password. So user.getPassword, this is the user that was fetched from the database, so it contains the encoded password. So we'll compare the raw password against the encoded password, and this tells us whether or not the password is valid or not. So that's really what we have to do in multiple places. In order to save the user credentials, I've actually delegated it to the account service class. So for instance, here we have the register user function, and straight away we basically fetch the encoded password by providing the raw password, and then we should forget about the raw password. In fact, we should set it to null here. So when we create user, we're creating the user using the encoded password. So this way, whenever you store data, you're not going to be storing any plain text values, essentially. So if you're storing user credentials and you wish to avoid storing them in plain text, this is what you should do. Let's get started and have a look at postman requests. So we'll be able to see what's happening. So for instance, if you want to register the user, I'll just quickly start the service. If you want to register the user, we've got some functions already doing that. So imagine I'm trying to register a user with a username testuser3. His email is testemail3 and the password is password. What we need to make sure is that the password is not shown as plain text in the database. So that is the purpose of this tutorial. We'll just wait until this has finished starting up. Almost done. Okay, started, so I'll click this. Okay, great. So here we've got a response saying that we've registered this user, testuser3. We can even demonstrate them working. So if I click login testuser3, we'll be able to log in, and here we should get our JWT authentication token. So there it is. So fantastic, the user works. So all we need to do is make sure that this password is not stored in plain text in the database. So if we go in here, I've got the PSQL prepared. If we click this, okay. So we select the username, email, and password from the users table. And we can see here that there's our test user 3, there's the email, and you can see the password has been encoded. So this means nothing to me, that I can't do anything with that. So that really protects the user's credentials and values. So in some places you might want to do the same for the username and email, but obviously if you want to surface these values out, you can't do it. It's only for really protected data. So that's it. Hopefully that made sense to everyone. Like I say, you'll be able to get the code from the GitHub repository. Any questions, let me know. Good luck, guys.